Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist, not media commentary columnist, but rather social commentary columnist, because we have retired the media commentary column in favor of the social commentary column. Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And our Washington commentary columnist, who was once our media commentary columnist, but is now our Washington commentary columnist. We no longer have a media commentary columnist, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John. And, it's ironic because I would like to engage in some media commentary today.
Yes, we are going to be doing some media commentary today. One piece of media commentary, just to get out of the way. If you are watching us on YouTube, and I do recommend you try the podcast on YouTube, go to Commentary Magazine Podcast and look us up. We have almost 9,000 subscribers over the last couple of months. Please go, please like, please subscribe. Help us. You might enjoy watching us. And today, for you watchers, Google Chrome offered me the option of using some filters, and I clicked on a filter. You'll see that it looks like I am floating in heaven against a blue screen. I cannot figure out how to turn it off so that you can see my bookcase, which is what you usually see. Right. And so if you're watching, I am, in fact, a godhead floating in space.
You look like you're about to star in a Sesame Street skit, and Elmo or Grover is going to appear alongside you. Yeah, exactly. And you'll engage in a colloquy with them.
Right. Oh, that's another good way of looking at it. Or as I say, I'm Zardoz flying in from the flying into the screen. So there's a lot to talk about, and of course, because we are people in the media and we're obsessed with the media, we're going to start with the least consequential matter at hand, because it's just something that we can't get away from. I would say two different things to talk about the media. One is the Washington Post, and the other is the Jake Tapper, Nick Thompson book.
And there's also the White House Correspondents Association fight.
Yes. Okay. So we have three
Alex Thompson, John. Alex
Thompson. That's right. Nick Thompson was the editor of Wired, I think. So I'm getting my Thompsons confused. You all look alike to me. Anyway, so to get to Jeff Bezos yesterday morning, the owner of the Washington Post, announcing that he was redirecting the Washington Post opinion policies to focus exclusively on free markets and personal liberties. And of course, the entire world went insane. We're once again back to the world of people announcing they're going to cancel their Washington Post subscriptions. People on staff at the Washington Post attacking the owner for his temerity in announcing this change in policy. David Shipley, the current opinion editor, leaving the Washington Post because he cannot possibly defend free markets and personal liberties, it would appear. That's just a bridge too far, people.
Bridge too far.
And that is personal liberties. What are you talking about? This is 1933. It's the Reichstag fire. We need to limit your personal liberties in order to prevent the guy who wants to limit your personal liberties from limiting your personal liberties, so you are not allowed to praise personal liberties. Anyway, quick take. Jeff Bezos has lost $300 million in the last 3 years on the Washington Post. He owns it outright, entirely. Paper would not exist without him, because nobody is buying a paper that loses $100 million a year. I mean, maybe somebody like Elon, it's his version of buying Twitter. He bought it 12 years ago. He was sold on the idea that making it a resistance paper was the future, and maybe they could stop Trump, and maybe they could become a new voice with democracy dying in darkness. And clearly he woke up with Trump's presidency in the offing in September, October, and said, these guys just sold me an unbelievable bill of goods. I'm just a guy out here in Seattle. I don't want to be crosswise of this administration. They've been making me preach things in my paper that I don't believe in, and I'm done. We're not going to endorse, which is what the first thing that he did when he said he wasn't going to endorse for president. And now he's saying, I don't like this editorial line anymore. I'm changing it. And for the fact that he is employing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people at a dead loss, subsidizing their salaries, they have the temerity to whine and complain that he is, becoming a monster, a terrible person. Good. So quit. How dare you? How dare you attack the guy who is basically literally taking money out of his wallet to pay you when you are doing absolutely nothing to help his bottom line, and he is doing this kind of out of the goodness of his heart.
Well, they're complaining that he likes freedom, which is
he's
interesting.
They're right.
I would just want to correct the timeline a little bit. I think Bezos, like a lot of people in the tech industry, really soured on progressivism over the past 4 years under Joe Biden and the Biden economy and Biden's policies on regulation, taxation, and antitrust, among other things. And then a tipping point for me, as I look at Bezos' evolution, was the assassination attempt in July. I believe that after that assassination attempt, Bezos issued a tweet that was very positive toward President Trump, saying that he demonstrated courage under fire, which was true. And then a process of reconciliation began. Some of the reporting I've seen suggests that my favorite American, Governor Doug Burgum, now our Secretary of Interior, played a key role in brokering this new relationship between President Trump and Jeff Bezos. And then, of course, as you say, John, the non-endorsement controversy happened in the fall, right before the election. I have to say, I am so excited by this news. I love this news. We're going to have another editorial page devoted to freedom and arguing for constitutional rule of law and free markets and individual liberties protected by our Bill of Rights.
I love it. It's outrageous. How dare you? I know that I'm this Neanderthal, but I think it's a great thing to have. I mean, just think about the monopoly that the liberal media has. And do you have one paper, the Wall Street Journal, which stands for free minds and free markets, as its longstanding motto puts it? And now we're going to have another paper, the Washington Post, a storied paper, arguing for these ideals. I saw this news and I've just felt happy ever since. Abe, you wrote a newsletter the other day. Our newsletter, available for you in the afternoons. Go to commentary.org, click on newsletter at the top of the page, subscribe. You can read Abe's newsletter around 3 to 4 p.m. And you said, look, something's going on in America. This survey suggesting that the decline in religious belief seems to have halted or reversed itself a little bit. And that you say basically the last 5 years have been the 5 years of a God that failed, meaning socialism plus wokeness. And I think it's not just that Bezos went through the Biden years not liking the policies of Biden. This was the long dark night of the soul for people who own corporations and businesses. Their internal the revolution from within by the 25-year-old know-nothings who, for some reason, they were convinced needed to be kowtowed to. The Trump election, it was 24 hours after Trump won that people were like, well, there goes our DI department. Okay, we're done. Okay, no more DI department. Hey, get out of here. Go retire. We're firing 250 people in this category. Company business after business after business after business because they allowed these radicals free reign inside their companies.
Yeah, I mean, as I said in the letter, the leveling off of the religious decline happened over that 5 years, from 2020 to today, which is exactly when radicalism became institutionalized, and it was institutionalized public, in the government, but also in industry, in the private sector. I mean, with all these businesses taking on their DEI departments, as you say, John, and clearly it's a loser. I mean, you need someone like a Bezos to come along and just speak it and change the policy and say, okay, this is whatever else it is commercially a loser, and this has to change. And it's also a kind of growing up at a strangely late age,
There's a sense in which he just one day randomly in the last maybe 6 months picked up the newspaper he owns and perhaps read it cover to cover, or page, every single page. And what he would have found is an institution that has been in decline, not just because of its ideological bent. Some of its most outspoken columnists and writers, people like Karen Attiah, are openly gleefully anti-Semitic. You have the absolute decline of local coverage. This used to be a newspaper that, for those of us who live in D.C., we could rely upon for local news, including local news on crime, on what the city council was doing. That's gone. That's decimated too. So what purpose does a paper serve if it's only in resistance, and the resistance is done because the American people said the resistance is done, we're putting this guy back in? I think it's rather savvy of him, and he is an outsider to the media industry, but he's also very close to government. I mean, Amazon Web Services hosts a huge number of federal government services. Like he's a huge contractor for the federal government, so it's not as if this guy just has a one note, I think he means what he says when he says he cares about free enterprise and freedom, because he himself as a businessman takes that into account when he's dealing with the federal government. So I'll be curious to see what this looks like in practice, how he implements this.
Well, obviously the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Who will he hire to replace? Whom will he hire to replace? Who will he hire to replace? Okay, whom will he hire to replace David Shipley? What will happen to the columnists and people at the paper who are not subscribers to the principle that free markets and personal liberties are the key themes that they wish to cover? Will Jennifer Rubin survive? Will Karen Attiah survive?
Well, Jennifer Rubin's gone. She's on Substack.
Oh, she's on Substack. I'm sorry. She left.
Attiah is still there. And this announcement, as Christine alluded to, came just a couple days after.
One day
after a Free Beacon reporter went to a book signing with Attiah and asked her if she still stood by her pro-Hamas tweet on October 7th. And she said, yes.
I mean, two things happened. That Free Beacon reporter showed up, and so did an average reading citizen.
Mm-hmm.
The footage is on YouTube. It's astonishing. This was a book event for Peter Beinart, may his name be cursed, and a book that he has written about how to be a Jew after Gaza, which I believe means how to be a member of Hamas. I think that's basically his answer. And Karen Attiah was his interlocutor. I think it was at Politics and Prose,
yes,
which is the one of the leading bookstores in DC, in Northwest DC. And someone stood up and said to Karen Attiah, are you still willing to stand behind what you said about how this is what decolonization looks like, which is what she said on October 7th. A columnist for the Washington Post who was made a columnist and a leading figure because of the outrage she expressed at the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi sort of the anti-government Saudi journalist who was killed in Turkey by Saudi intelligence forces, presumably under the direction of Mohammed bin Salman, and the years of rage and horror at the monstrous murder of Khashoggi, which was pretty horrible. The same person celebrating the slaughter of 1,200 people on the grounds that this is what decolonization looked like. And she said, I make no apologies for what I said. And like 36 hours later, Bezos is like, you're all out of here unless you want to change your tune. I would love to believe that was the last straw. I hope there will be reporting on how Bezos got to this conclusion and decided to do what he is doing. And by the way, I'm going to make a defense of the cravenness, if you want to call it that, of him trying to make nice with the president of the United States. Grow up, everybody in media. People who own newspapers and have owned organs of, magazines, things like that, when they do so at a loss, they're doing so not out of the goodness of their heart because they are hoping to spread the message that democracy dies in darkness. They do so for all kinds of complicated reasons. But when you work for them and they lose money, and I have been in two such circumstances in my life, one with Rupert Murdoch when I was the arts and editorial page editor and a columnist at the New York Post when Murdoch was losing $30-40 million a year on the Post, and once earlier in my career when I worked for Sun Myung Moon at the Washington Times, who was also losing tens of millions of dollars. They did so for complicated reasons. What was allowed to me and to the people who worked with me at the Post and at the Washington Times was the ability to ply our trade in a functional news organization that produced a daily paper in which I was allowed to edit and write, and other people were allowed to edit and write and do reporting and make a living and do all that. And if what they wanted was for the paper to say we should create a space force to send people to live on Pluto, and I was the editorial page editor, I would write that editorial, or I would quit if I couldn't really support that.
Can we add another layer of context to this as well that I think goes missing in this story about Bezos? And that's that reporters in legacy media have for decades, and most recently for the 4 years of the Biden administration, actively cozied up to people in power. I mean, Kamala Harris was notorious for having lots of reporters come to the Veep's mansion and have dinners and cocktails and all kinds of socializing, which then redound to their benefit when they try to, cover up someone's cognitive or physical decline, or get themselves installed without any sort of democratic process to become a new nominee to replace said declining figure.
Maybe that's a good segue to one of the other media stories. Just before we get to Biden, this whole controversy about the White House Correspondents Association and the press pool that follows President Trump, and Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, saying that now the office of the president, will decide which reporters are following President Trump at a given time. One of the reporters who was very close to Kamala Harris is Eugene Daniels, formerly of Politico, who's now an MSNBC person.
Well, he just quit because he's going to have a show on MSNBC.
He's going to quit Politico.
Which I imagine he is going to display the latest in fashions.
He's a very fashionable person.
Extremely
I've met him many times. He's extremely friendly. He's fun to talk to, but he's also extremely close to Harris and the Democrats. Now he's going to be on MSNBC. And he's the head of the White House Correspondents Association that's complaining about the Trump treatment of the press. But it just shows you not just the bias of much of the mainstream media, but also the guild mentality. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, John. There's a sense of, well, this is ours. You can't touch this. Even if you literally own the paper, you can't interfere. And I have to say, that's kind of I'm going to speak ill of other generations here, or my generation. It's a kind of a millennial thing. How dare you tell me what to do? Who are you, Mr. Bezos, with your incredible businesses that send Matt Continetti books on a daily basis and feed the world and house the government secrets and send commercial spacecraft to the stars? How dare you tell me that I shouldn't be, pro-Hamas on my Slack channel? That mentality is widespread in our press corps, and it's unhealthy. And people need to say, quit it.
Look, there is now this new way of being in journalism, which we alluded to with Jennifer Rubin, where individual people can try to sell their own brands on the free market, mostly using the platform called Substack, but you also start your own YouTube channel. If you don't want to do it in words, you could do all that kind of stuff. There is now the barrier to entry to try to make your own business out of yourself is now almost zero. And so go do it. Go do it, really. Like, you know what? Now it's cowardice if you don't. If you're going to take money from somebody whose views you detest, or whose businesses you don't like, or whose behavior you find abhorrent, go see how you do on your own. That's what a brave person does. That's what a person of integrity does. That's now that you can. It used to be that you couldn't. There was no how are you going to get into the public prints unless you knew somebody who owned a giant printing plant at a 19th century industrial factory that was producing this giant paper object that was delivered by hundreds of trucks. You couldn't ply your trade. And now you can. And anybody who is sitting there inside the Washington Post disgusted by the behavior of Jeff Bezos, go see what you can do. Enjoy. As for me, just as I am extraordinarily grateful to the donors who make Commentary Inc., a nonprofit 501c3, keep the lights on and help us continue to publish and do this podcast and try to influence people on matters of great importance. My presumption is that people choose willingly to give me and give Commentary the money to do that because they are in harmony with how we feel and want that view to be out there and part of the common discussion. I am awash with gratitude for their eleemosynary generosity, and I think it is disgusting for David Maraniss, who is one of the storied writers at the Washington Post, who has been collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, again, directly out of Jeff Bezos's pocket, because he has run that thing at a loss pretty much since he bought it, to say, I will never write for this place again. So don't write for it again.
And can I just
go resign and go write your filth somewhere. Like, this guy gave you money. He gave you money for years so you could do whatever it was you wanted. Write a book about Vince Lombardi, piss all over Donald Trump. I don't care. He let you do it. And now he's like, I think I'm done with that now. And the thing to do is to say, gee, that was really a great run. I'm really grateful to you for what you did for me.
I just want to add also that, like, what do these liberal journalists think the world of media has been like for conservatives for decades, until the sort of new age of Substack and everything? For decades, if you were picked to be the token conservative somewhere, you were the luckiest there was. It was either that or like sort of conservative ghetto that you had to, like, find work in. That was it. Interesting to see. I wonder how much that's going to flip, if this is the start of that. I mean, obviously, the mammoth thing here, the New York Times is going to survive as the New York Times. I mean, so that's not going to change.
Yeah, but it's not because of the news coverage. It's because of the recipes and the puzzles.
Wordle saves the New York Times.
Wordle,
right?
and Wirecutter.
Consumer Reports, yeah.
And Consumer Reports, exactly. Like, that's what saved the New York Times. It wasn't, lying about Trump's, it wasn't publishing Trump's tax records, which they had no business doing, and it wasn't lying about Russiagate. But that's not what kept them going.
The lesson that Bezos should take from that reality of the New York Times is to give people not what they want. You don't just want to serve them up, but practical things. So I want some more local news, Jeff Bezos, if you're listening, more local news about how DC as a city actually functions. It's a very powerful place, and a lot of stuff goes on here that we need to know.
To make money on it, you would need to have like a Pokemon Go version of local news. Like, you put on your augmented glasses and then you can go and look around. This is my
nightmare, but okay, you're probably
right. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Well,
the New York Times model is the same as the publishing industry, and I think it gets again to the self-conceit of a lot of people who write and talk for a living. I'm one of them. But a lot of people who write and talk for a living think that, people actually like what we do and value it, when in fact the cost of writing and talking is literally zero. And so in the publishing industry, it's like, oh, these great books that come out, another Pulitzer Prize winner, the National Book Award winner. Why does publishing exist? Bibles and cookbooks. Why does the New York Times exist?
Romantasy.
And romantasy now. Right. Why does the New York Times exist? It's recipes.
Books.
Yeah, we're free writers.
That's what actually subsidizes the 800-page biography of Vince Lombardi.
I got two important anecdotes for you. So in the 1970s, my late mother went to work at Basic Books, which is still extant, which was part of Harper and Row. And Basic Books published social science, works of social science stuff. Irving Kristol started Basic Books. And it actually made money, produced a couple of gigantic bestsellers in her time. Gödel, Escher, Bach being one famous one. Wealth and Poverty by George Gilder being another, various other ones. And one day her boss, Erwin Glickus, said to her, "How do you think we stay in business?" And she hadn't worked in publishing before, so she said, "I don't know how we stay in business." And he said, "This entire firm, Harper and Row, is supported by one book. It is called Linda Goodman's Sun Signs. And it was a book about astrology. And it sold 3 million copies a year. And the royalties from that book and the proceeds from that book were what supported the publication of Visible Man by George Gilder, or there are 15 books on Matt's bookshelf behind him if you are watching.
Thomas Sowell's collected works.
Exactly. All of that. That's publishing. That's what Matt's talking about, right? There's that in publishing. And a famous survey done at the Washington Post in the late 70s, early 80s, they spent a huge amount of money on a readership survey. Papers generally didn't do readership surveys. They were too hard or they were too expensive. No one really cared. But they decided they wanted to know what people read in the paper. And it was until that moment, really, in American journalism, people thought things like, people are buying the paper to read George Will. People are buying the paper to, read, I don't know, Flora Lewis, though she didn't write she wrote for the New York Times. That's really what's important. That's what people go there. They go to the op-ed page. They want to know what the editorials are saying. They want this. They want that. Washington Post discovered that the single most read thing in the Washington Post, a paper that had 60% of the market, 60% of its market, that was Washington, the DC, the Virginia suburbs, the Maryland suburbs, millions of people, 60% of the market. The single best read thing in the Washington Post was Walter Scott's Personality Parade, which was the inside front cover of Parade magazine, which was an insert into the Washington Post published by Parade magazine, not even produced by the Washington Post. The most read thing in the Washington Post was something that was inserted into the Washington Post. Either Parade paid them or, well, I don't even know, or Parade gave it to them for free. I don't remember. Parade was this, like Sunday supplement with, was like 16 pages long. It's hard to believe. It was a huge thing in its day. And of course, this was a long, dark night of the soul for everybody in journalism, learning that, in fact, what was read by people was this, are Sonny and Cher still friends now that they've gotten divorced? Why, yes, they are co-parenting their child Chastity together. And they try to maintain a good friendship. That is what people read in the Washington Post in the late 70s and early 80s.
Okay, but this example, as well as the ones we've given of the more recent New York Times, suggests something that journalists are not embracing, and that's a sense of humility and gratitude. And that's actually where we must talk about the gaslighting that's entered the chat with Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson's big book about what went wrong, what was the big cover up on Joe Biden and his health. This, to me, is going to be a hinge moment for media, because the immediate response of the public, as judged by some social media commentary and other stuff I've seen, mainly online, granted, but also folks I've talked to in the last 24 hours, is people are appalled at this. The hubris of the very people who manufactured the cover-up for 4 years and happily did so and denounced those who raised any questions at all, coming out with a big book. And I will say, I'm surprised Alex Thompson is co-authoring this with Jake Tapper. Thompson actually is one of the few reporters who did raise some of these issues towards the end of Biden's term and got absolutely slammed for it. So maybe it was a strategic decision on his part. But I cannot wait to see what the response is to this book.
I think that this book is now a hinge moment. So this book, it's called Original Sin, and the topic of it is the cover-up of Joe Biden's decline. So there are several questions that are going to be raised before anybody gets a chance to read it. Number one, in what year does the narrative begin? Will it begin in 2018 or 2019? I'm sure it'll begin with some anecdote from the night of the debate or something like that. But where does the narrative of the book, how long does it extend? Number one. And number two, how much will be dedicated and devoted to the role of the Washington press corps, the White House press corps, and people like Jake Tapper in perpetuating the idea that Biden was fine. And as we do every single time that we talk about this, I am going to say that if you were obsessive enough to go back 3 or 4 years into this podcast's archives, you would find that at least once a week, we said something beginning probably in the middle of 2021 about Biden's decline. And probably in 2020, and maybe even in 2019, if you remember those debates, and this, of course, is why I say I wonder what's going to happen. Whichever Castro brother ran for president, and I can't remember which one. It was neither Raul nor Fidel, but it was Joaquin or
Julian,
right. Which one was it?
I think it was Joaquin who ran.
Okay, well, I can't remember which one. Ran for president, attempted to do a cognitive decline trap on Biden during a debate. And his candidacy was ended by the outrage expressed at the disrespect being shown to poor Joe Biden by this effort on his part to call attention to the fact that Biden had just contradicted something that he had said 2 minutes earlier. And then he said something like, "Did you forget?" Oh, how dare he? How dare he do such a thing? This is just awful.
There was another famous moment at one of the debates, too, afterward, when Dr. Jill went up to the stage and grabbed Biden by the hand right as soon as it was done. And, of course, that same gesture, when it was repeated at the Democratic fundraiser in June of last year, was with Obama, was one of the signal moments, and, of course, became the subject of the most important op-ed ever, George Clooney's New York Times piece.
Yes, it was the George Kennan. It was the George Kennan memo of our time.
The ex-telegram of our time was George Clooney in the New York Times saying it's time for Joe to go.
Yeah,
but
so, so you can start earlier.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, by the way, we definitely talked about it in 2020 because part of the what we said, part of the advantage that Biden had in sort of running from the quote basement because of the pandemic was that people weren't exposed to his cognitive decline.
So let's talk about this for a minute.
I just want to say one thing with the book. They can. I don't know if they're going to do this. They can focus the story entirely on the administration, right? And they could, and in doing that, they could say, so this is how the administration fooled us. That's our story. This is how the media got conned by the White House.
And they will throw under the bus the people closest to Joe Biden in order to protect their own furtherance of this lie.
Okay, so let's offer we're all going to read this. Everybody is going to read this book. This is the story that we all want to read. I mean, even though Biden's long gone, I mean, we all want to know. We all want to know what the details are. We all want to know.
We should buy one copy and share it. I don't want to fund I don't want to encourage this kind of behavior in reporters.
He's now, Biden's not gone. He got the MCAA rep, and maybe I'm thinking he should star in a remake of On Golden Pond. Kind of put him out there and talk about aging in a very kind of, Twilight type drama. Twilight years drama, not Twilight the Vampire Saga.
Yeah, there's and Jill Biden going, "You old poop, you're my knight in shining armor."
Don't you think that they would win a bunch of awards?
Yeah,
on Golden Pond featuring the Bidens
on Golden Rehoboth.
Yeah, on Golden Beach.
Yeah. Okay, so there is a scenario in which they're honest. There's a scenario in which this book is half about the government and half about the media.
No.
Now here, okay, you're saying
cannot
no.
Be honest. Jake Tapper would have to implicate himself, and Jake Tapper is never going to implicate himself. He won't do it.
Okay. People aren't going to like that I say this. When George Stephanopoulos left the Clinton White House, he wrote a book called All Too Human, which is one of the best books ever written about working inside a White House. And much of it was about his own hubris and misbehavior. and it was a clarifying moment. It actually helped him move on to the second part of his career, because he was willing to say things and reveal things that most loyal White House aides wouldn't necessarily do, and talk about his own malfeasances and arrogances and stuff like that. There is a world in which
I think it's different, though.
I gotta say, I'm gonna be the cynic here, because the only reason he did that, the only reason he betrayed those internal White House discussions, is because he wanted to pivot to a media career, and that is how you make your bread and butter in the current political media. And he saw that. He was the first to do it. He certainly wasn't the first aide to betray his president.
Let's say
I'm not buying that.
Let's say that Matt and
honorable story.
We're all editors, so let's say that we are Jake Tapper's and Thompson's editors, right? And they come to us and they give us the manuscript and they say, what's missing? So I would say, let's say they produce the book that you, the cynic, say, and that we have infinite amounts of time before the release of the book comes out to say, this is how you actually do this. What would you tell them they need to reveal that they do not reveal in your cynic's version of what they will produce, which is, as I say, just the White House, here's what they did. They had a meeting and Biden, drooled into his pencil cup and nobody said anything. And Jill said, if you say a word, I'm going to, have the Secret Service make the dog bite you or whatever. I mean, so what would you tell them? You would say, okay, what's missing? Here are the paragraphs that are missing. What would you insist they insert? I'm serious.
A description of what they thought when, for example, they'd go to a White House press conference, having already pre-submitted their questions to the White House, and seeing Joe Biden hold the card that has their face on it with the pre-screened question.
All three White House press conferences.
Yes, exactly.
It's interesting. Tapper was one of the moderators of the Trump-Biden debate, so you could begin the narrative there, saying one of us was there and here's what happened. The Free Beacon, though, has a pretty remarkable supercut on its website, going through all the times that Tapper shut down discussions of Biden's age prior to the debate in 2024. So as an editor, you would probably say, hey, you have to kind of reckon with that. I mean, the media piece is interesting because remember when Alex Thompson has been following this story forever, and he's been the best Biden reporter. And so there are going to be a lot of scoops. But when the Wall Street Journal last spring tried to talk about Biden's age and broach the subject, it was denounced by the Media Guild in the same way that Bezos is being denounced by the Media Guild. And so that has to be part of the story too. But I think you're right to suggest that this story, the book they're going to tell, is really about the Biden family's attempt to hide Joe Biden's condition from the American public for about 6 years.
But I just also want to say, I mean, what I would say is missing would Tapper would never be able to work again. I mean, what I would say is what were you really all thinking during all of this? Because there were some glimpses. I mean, there were very few people, but one of the reasons that I actually respect the hell out of Van Jones is that he was one of the few who got on like CNN way before the debate and said, we're hearing a lot of in whispers from Democrats who are really concerned about Biden's decline. So we know there were conversations. We know
Axelrod was saying similar things very early on.
So come on. How did you handle all that stuff as it was the whispering and the rest of it? Yeah.
Okay, so in the world in which the book that is produced is the most honest and authoritative, I would say, look, Jake Tapper worked at CNN. I think they're now on their he's on his third or fourth boss since Biden came in. I mean, I can't remember who there was Jeff Zucker, then there was whatever the hell his name is, Licht.
Jeff Peter,
Licht.
Paul, and Mary. Yeah, they're cycling through CNN.
Now there's Thompson, another Thompson, I think is now running it. Anyway, so 3 or 4 people right? So got nothing to fear from them. So what if there had been guidance from above? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, was there guidance from above? Was it the corporate line that CNN was not to cover Biden's
that doesn't
infirmity?
excuse an
I'm not
actual
saying it
reporter.
excuses it.
Yeah.
No. I'm not saying it excuses it. I'm talking about whether, if you are writing a history of a cover-up, and the cover-up has two faces. One is what went on internally to cover it up, and then the other is the communication across this weird amalgam that people are now worried about with the new White House press corps rules of the administration and all of its friends in the press and everybody in the Biden administration whose spouses worked at the networks and places like that and were the commentators and all of that. How was the "shut up, he explained" message transmitted? And was it transmitted, or was it all understood? Because I'm telling you, some of it was transmitted, and there's more of it than we realize. Catherine Herridge yesterday came out with footage, like pictures she took of CBS seizing her notes on investigations she had done into Hunter Biden and other things, that it took her a year and a half to get back from them. They took the notes that she had taken, claiming they were CBS's property because she was an employee of theirs. In order, it was catch and kill. They took the stuff to prevent it from being used.
Right, but this is the point. This is why this book, I think, cannot do what a book that wants to actually tell the story truthfully must do, which is that it's bad enough what happened internally, and particularly the role of people like Hunter Biden and First Lady Jill Biden played in this cover-up, because we know they were central figures. But it never would have survived and continued if the press hadn't also joined in the cover-up. And that's where I think whatever they try to do to focus on one and not the other, or to maybe throw some corporate bosses under the bus as a token, they are not. Maybe Alex Thompson could have told this story himself because he was on this beat and he was raising these issues. But once you add Jake Tapper to that mix, I do not trust that they are going to have an honest accounting of what went on among journalists, what they knew, when they knew it, all of this stuff, with someone who was an insider participating in the cover-up, unless he's had some dramatic mea culpa, is shifting careers, and is going to blow up everything behind him and walk away from his TV career. In that case, maybe he can tell the truth, but I'm doubtful.
Well, a great book that is cited for generations as a new example of a work of political media self-criticism and honesty is not something to sneeze at. And so Jake Tapper is somebody that I like personally. I like a couple of his novels. I would suggest to him that he think long and hard about making that leap, because there is a gigantic... he was quoted as saying, Toni Morrison said, "The book to write is the book that you want to read." And that's the book I wanted to write. That's the book I want to read. And that's why I have joined with Thompson to write this book, Original Sin. Well, there are two original sins, right? That's what I'm saying. There's the original sin of the Biden family and the Biden political team covering up Biden's infirmities. And then there is the original sin of the communications by the mainstream media that allowed this to continue.
There's also the sin of quoting Toni Morrison. It's like, can we find somebody else to quote?
Mea culpa, I'm quoting Toni Morrison too, but that's what he said. And if he means it, then write the book that you want to read, because the book that Christine says you're going to write, Jake, is not the book you want to read, and you know it full well. You want to know what was going on at MSN. You know what was going on at CNN and in your own office. Maybe you want to know what was going on at MSNBC. Maybe you want to know what was going on at ABC and at NBC and at CBS and at the New York Times and at the Washington Post.
Well, you're asking him to be a whistleblower, basically. You're asking him to write a whistleblower book about his own industry.
The times are changing, right? I mean, Joe and Mika are going to Mar-a-Lago. MSNBC is in this huge upheaval. Jeff Bezos is saying the Washington Post is going to stand for individual liberty and free markets. This cultural shift that we've been talking about could also apply to CNN's, signature anchor.
Can we go back to the point you made about the White House Correspondents Association? Because, the line is, this is terrible. What's happening now is that the White House is choosing what reporters will be allowed to be in the press room, which is a very, very small room.
Well, Peter Baker thinks that's the beginning of Putin.
Yeah.
That's what Putin did.
Peter Baker, who is the White House correspondent of the New York Times, Peter Baker went on Twitter yesterday and said, comparisons to Russia are always bad. But here's one. This reminds me of the Kremlin. Like, didn't you just say that you're not supposed to do that? In the same sentence that you just wrote?
And didn't you belong to a White House press corps for 4 years that silenced all discussions of Joe Biden's physical and mental impairments?
So let's talk. The elephant in the room is, why did they cover up? And the reason they covered up is anything that they might have done to do this would strengthen Donald Trump. And the purpose of the world of American liberalism from 2016, when it became clear that he was actually going to be the nominee of the Republican Party.
May 2016, right.
May 2016 through November 5th, 2024 was stop him. Stop him any way you can. Stop him, stop him, stop him. And the argument was, you cannot do anything that will hurt the Biden. Not the argument, the emotional.
Well, no, Jim Rudenberg wrote it in the New York Times. He said, with Donald Trump, the rules of journalism no longer apply,
right,
because of the threat he presents.
Right.
Therefore, we can take emergency action to stop him from becoming president.
I've used this quote 10 million times, right? That's the line in the Blues Brothers, right? The use of excessive force in the apprehension of the Blues Brothers has been approved, says the Chicago cop in the All Points Bulletin, right? That was the idea. Now, that's why, and that's also a question, that's the other thing that needs to be explored. How much of that was conscious? How much of that was discussed? How much of that was open? And part of the way people, we're thinking about this. And that's the other thing that Tapper and Thompson need to cover if they want this book not to be an intellectual disgrace. So, okay, here's the point I wanted to make. So they're shifting it around. They're gonna let the Free Beacon have a seat, and the Daily Wire have a seat, and whoever is Dan Bongino's gonna take over his show. He'll have a seat, and Charlie Kirk will have a seat. The Tates are coming back from Romania. Maybe they'll have a seat. It doesn't matter. Okay, here's what I wanted to bring up. Somebody tally. So yesterday there was the cabinet meeting. I watched the cabinet meeting. I don't know if you guys watched. It was like 90 minutes. It wasn't a cabinet meeting. So I suppose there was a cabinet meeting afterwards. It was a press conference. And Musk dominated the first 20 minutes, and then Trump dominated the next 70 minutes. According to some tally, Trump has now, since January 20th, answered 1,489 questions posed to him by the press. And Biden, I think, in the course of his entire presidency, answered 360. He's been there a month. There doesn't need to be a White House press corps. Anybody can ask the guy anything. He'll answer anything. He'll talk forever. He won't shut up. You remember this in 2020 when he was coming to the press room every day to talk about COVID, and the people were like, stop covering it. He shouldn't be allowed to speak. This is how he's the president of the United States. This was a very revelatory 70 minutes.
Interesting difference between this cabinet meeting and the first cabinet meeting in the first term as well, right? Because that cabinet meeting in 2017 was the kind of Politburo style, praise
of the leader.
Of the leader. Every single person around the table began talking about how lucky they were to be. And this was different. This was he was in charge. He delegated to Elon. Again, that whole storyline is so meaningful, and there's so many angles. But then he was just in charge and answering questions, probably because he doesn't feel threatened by some of his cabinet members like he did 8 years ago.
And he doesn't feel threatened by the press.
No.
You know,
Right.
what is it? The Churchill line: "There is nothing so exhilarating as being shot at without result."
Right.
So they spent 10 years trying to destroy him, and he is now stronger than ever, and they are weaker than ever. And Jeff Bezos is changing the editorial policy of the Washington Post, and Joe and Mika have half the audience that they had on November 4th, and MSNBC is flailing and crashing and burning and calling everybody, is being called a racist by everybody else. And he is standing there in the high 40s in his approval ratings, doing some good things, doing some bad things, whatever it is. But he is not the same person. And as I say, the weirdness here is it shouldn't be allowed that the White House Correspondents Association isn't picking who gets to be in the press room. And Trump is proving that it doesn't matter who's in the press room. And by the way, who asked the most questions yesterday? James Rosen. James Rosen, who is a long time, first met James Rosen, he was reporting for News Channel 12 in the Bronx.
Yep.
Contributor commentary, by the way. And a
biographer of Antonin Scalia.
Biographer of Antonin Scalia and of John Mitchell, and a very serious guy, and not
like Jake Tapper, a cartoonist.
Anyway, I'm just saying it's not like he was not being asked substantive questions by a serious and intellectually sober journalist.
James is with Newsmax.
James with Newsmax.
Of course, he was with Fox for many, many years.
Right. So I'm just saying that, but it doesn't matter because Trump will answer like any good politician or businessman. He will answer whatever question he wishes to answer, not the question that he was asked, which is what consultants tell, CEOs when they go in and they're going to be interviewed by 60 Minutes, how to handle themselves, which is don't answer the question you're asked, answer the question you want to answer. Trump has that down. But it was, it was the most substantive performance by a president in, I don't know, decades. It was, he went through the tour d'horizon, everything, energy policy, Ukraine, the Middle East, Gaza, whatever. And, as I say, some of it I was horrified by, some of it, NATO, Europe, inflation, the big, beautiful bill. He was. So what do you need the press corps to ask him questions for? You want to write them down, hand them to Jen Psaki so that she can then put them on a card for Biden. He can complain that Caitlin Collins is being mean to him. That's what you want. Congratulations.
But there is, I would argue, there was a section of the legacy media press corps that did like that, and they liked it because who was running the government with a figurehead president? All of their sources, all of their friends behind the scenes, the ones who actually aren't accountable to voters because they're pulling strings without anyone even knowing it. And so keeping the conceit alive that he was making these day-to-day decisions and was really, nimble on his feet and turning cartwheels in the West Wing allowed this unelected, unaccountable group of people who we still don't quite know how many of them there were and how they operated, but we know to have existed given his condition. It allowed them to run the country for 4 years. And I think the press corps' positive response to that is also worrisome because there were people, whether they're connected through marriage or friendship or social circles, to those people running the country, were getting a lot of inside information. They were getting a lot of perhaps what they felt to be powerful, persuasive pull over some of those people. They liked that. There was a core group of them who liked that. And that's why I'm very doubtful that people like Jake Tapper are going to expose those people, because those people are also their friends.
And those are the Politburo. That's a Politburo.
Yes.
And I'm saying the weird thing is that Trump resists the accusation that he is, Hitler by not behaving like Hitler. He's totally unvarnished. He doesn't have Leni Riefenstahl setting up his camera angles. He's like, come on in, ask me whatever you want. We'll just keep going. I'm hungry. So you can see, I think he ended it because he probably wanted to eat a sandwich. It was like 12:45, but and I don't say this because I'm happy with a lot of what Trump is doing, although I think we might want to close out here to say that last night an important thing happened, which is that the Supreme Court made it's a complicated ruling. It's not that interesting. Ruled against a lower court judge placing, forcing the administration to start paying USAID bills by time certain. Right, that was the administration before the hearing to hear whether or not they were going to have to do this legally or whatever. This judge had announced that they would have to start paying the bills at midnight, and John Roberts came in and said no. This is going to follow proper procedure. You don't get to go in and like order the administration to do something like this without it being fully adjudicated and going through the court process. We grant the executive branch the rights of the executive branch, and it does not work for the legislative branch, and not the legislative branch, the judicial branch.
Yes.
Any thoughts on that?
Big ruling for Trump. I mean, another win, and I think it shows that when these cases reach the Supreme Court, as almost all of them inevitably will do, the court is going to choose its battles pretty carefully, I think. And on this sort of procedural matter, will follow the rule of law. The big fights, of course, will come down the line, probably next year, and that's over the president's asserted power to impound congressional spending and challenge. And then there's another fight that's going to come down probably later this year on the president's control over the independent agencies, which he's asserted over an executive order, and which is teeing up basically a challenge to a longstanding precedent called Humphrey's Executor, whose very name puts me to sleep. So I'm not going to elaborate any further, only to say that the Trump administration wants the Supreme Court to overturn that decision, as well as the decision on the presidential impoundment power from the 1970s. And, we don't know. I think the court may reserve some of its capital, to rule on those two cases rather than, say, interfere with the fate of USAID.
I have such cultural detritus in my head, that every time I've read in the last week about Humphrey's Executor, it puts me in mind of a song by my favorite little-known band, Fountains of Wayne, from Fountains of Wayne's genuinely great album, Welcome Interstate Managers. The song
is that the same album with Stacy's Mom?
It is.
Stacy's Mom is a classic. That is a classic anthem.
Right, but I mean, there are songs, they were unbelievably witty and literate, and there's a song called All Kinds of Time, which is about what happens as a pitcher is literally deciding whether he's going to throw to first or throw to home plate. That's the entire song. He's got all kinds of time. Anyway, there is a song called Haley's Waitress, which is why Humphrey's Executor rhymes with Haley's Waitress. And Haley's Waitress is a song about a guy who is waiting for the waitress to come back with the coffee pot to give him more coffee. And it's been so long, I miss you when you go. And she's, of course, called Haley's Waitress because she's like Haley's Comet. She only comes around once every 76 years. Anyway, it's a great song. Welcome Interstate Managers is a genuinely great album. That's going to be today's commentary recommend.
It's great.
Listen to Haley's
Going deep into the archive today.
I know. Well, it just occurred to me. I had another idea, but that's a...
Let's
anyway,
do it.
Welcome Interstate Managers by Fountains of Wayne. Today's commentary recommends one of the wittiest and most literate sort of rock pop albums of our time. So that's all the time we have. We'll be back tomorrow. For Matt, Christine, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.